Hey friends, you're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene.
Today we're going to talk about how things went for 2020.
Yep, we've been planning to get around to a 2020 review for a while, and we really needed to have a little downtime and the time to talk about all the things that went on in 2020. Now, I'm ignoring anything in the outside world.
It was a really busy year.
It was incredibly busy.
Overall, I think the year was pretty good.
It was, what wasn't a positive thing was a learning experience. I remember a quotation years ago about that anything that wasn't positive should at least be a learning experience.
January was just
January.
Ordinary.
Yeah, ordinary. We had already ordered our seeds and stuff like that because we always order early. February, we did the first event of the year for my company.
Then everything fell apart
canceled.
with her business.
Right. The remaining events for the entire year were canceled after that. In addition to that, we managed to finish up the lawsuit for your car accident last year.
That's been going on. Let's see, the car accident will be 4 years ago next month.
Right.
And really, probably the first 3 quarters of 2020, most of my time was consumed with dealing with doctors, going to appointments, going to specialists, going to the other side's expert witnesses, reviewing documents, all those sorts of things.
Right.
But the good news is
it's done.
We finally got a settlement now. We didn't make any money on this. What we really did was just recover the medical expenses.
What else went on? It was the hottest summer on record, not just for where we are, but for the entire state.
And the driest, too.
And the driest. Our total rainfall for all of 2020 was about less than 6.5 inches.
Things that were beyond our control.
Yeah.
We didn't really have the early summer monsoons, which we typically have, which we really rely on for providing a good amount of rain into our outdoor garden.
Right.
And then to fill our water catchment system.
Right, and then we didn't have the late summer monsoons at all. They were just like a no-go. They call them the non-soons this year. So we were under burn ban, as in you can't smoke outside your house. We wanted to kind of review like the different parts of our garden and our yard and our house and everything else, and just talk in general about the things that went right mostly and some things that didn't go right. Just to kind of do a 20,000 foot view of,
well, maybe 100,000.
100,000 foot view of 2020. We thought that would be kind of a nice way to sum up the year and move on.
Now, we were talking in December, and it didn't feel like we'd really done anything this year, but when we sat down and really went through in detail about what we accomplished and what we didn't accomplish, it was actually pretty remarkable how much we actually got done.
It just didn't feel like a very productive year, but in reality it was. We got to test a bunch of things we'd wanted to try out. We actually learned a lot too, which is for good and bad. But
it's all good eventually.
Yeah, in the long run it's good. In the short run you may go, ow. But, you know, it's part of real life anywhere you are, whether you're growing in a small pot in your backyard or in a 30-acre plot somewhere on a hillside. So greenhouse was definitely a thumbs up. The hydroponics were a mixed bag. Part of that had nothing to do with anything we did wrong. Part of that had to do with some bad seeds we got. And yes, we've been refunded on the seeds, and that doesn't make up for the fact that we spent months trying to care for these plants and try and figure out what the heck is wrong with them. I will never grow that many cucumbers in the greenhouse again, unless I have a farmer's market that I'm taking them to. The greenhouse in general, this past winter into the spring, was a huge success.
Now, one of the things that we had problems with the greenhouse had nothing to do with the greenhouse. It actually had to do with our water catchment for rainwater. We improved our water catchment this year.
Yeah, that was one of our projects this year. Is we added more gutters to the house, and we repaired a couple of leaks in the system. Had it all set up, and we also have some backup IBC totes that we can pump into and stuff like that.
And then it didn't rain.
And it didn't rain.
So
there's nothing you can do about that. If you don't have rain coming out of the sky, there's not a darn thing you can do. So we wound up either hauling our own water or buying our water from a water haul person. I could have the biggest, most wonderful water catchment system in the world. If it doesn't rain, I can't collect anything.
And that's really a lesson for everybody who's thinking about going off-grid in the desert, at least in our area, that even if you have a rainwater catching system, so you're going to be trying to drink it or garden with it, if you don't have rain, you don't have rainwater, which means you don't have water in your cistern. Now, we had some plans to do some additional expansion of our landscaping around our house, and it was just too hot for too long to do the work. It was over 105 for better than 3 weeks, pretty much every day. Now, there were some things that we did this year for gardening that were a little different. One was Irene was pretty insistent that we grow some food along our north foundation. And what do you think about how that turned out?
That was a huge success. We were actually able... It's an unusual environment. First of all, it never gets direct sun right up against the north side. Because we're a solar house, the house is oriented in such a fashion that it blocks that area. So they never get full sun, but they get a lot of brightness. And the wall is bright. The wall is white. So they get plenty of reflected light. That was absolutely stellar. I moved the rhubarb over there early in the season because they were in a bad location and they were not happy. That was a really good location for them. And a couple of things happen. Anytime we do have any moisture level at all, the roof drips, the eave of the roof drips right into the edge of that bed, so it puts moisture into the bed. The rhubarb were happy, and we planted a bunch of things that we had trouble planting when we wanted to because the weather was all over the place. It went from too cold to plant anything outside to too hot to plant anything outside. So we planted the things that we had wanted to get out earlier into the main part of the yard in there. So I wound up with a bunch of brassicas in there. I wound up with kohlrabis and broccoli and
right?
mini broccoli, and I had my spinach in there.
Right.
And the net result of there being a shade there is that we were able to keep that stuff alive well into the brutal weather summer because it was more moist. It is on irrigation, so that worked. But the fact that it was shaded was a total godsend. And because it's up against the north side of the house, it's also protected from the predominant wind, which is a southwestern wind here.
Now, the other thing that we did that was new this year, which is really kind of a modification of what we did last year, was we built some straw bale compost beds that are 2 feet deep.
We had one batch of straw bales from last year that was still pretty intact in the north yard here.
Well, they were more or less intact.
Yeah, well, it was like a planter with a skin of unrotted straw around the outside and rotted straw on the inside. We planted tomatoes in those. That worked really well. Those tomatoes were the best we had. But then we took other straw bales that we had that were rotted from one of the other beds here,
right,
that we had decided to convert back into a regular raised bed. And we put those into basically frames that we built out of some old garage doors and some leftover plywood. And those were stellar.
Yeah, the plan had actually been to move those straw bales from where they were, move them down into another area in the yard, and reuse them as straw bales again this past year. When I started moving them, they started falling. They were falling apart.
We grew cucurbits. So it was all the squashes, cucumbers, cantaloupes, and more cucumbers in the 2 beds. Unbelievable thumbs up on those. But we were very, very happy with those. Those worked absolutely stellar and really didn't stop working until the very end of the season when they got eaten by deer.
Dan's pink-eyed purple hull peas did really, really, really great.
Right.
We had to encase them with stuff to try to keep the deer that were coming in the yard.
So the deer were only able to nibble off the edges, so we got the whole center of the bed, so that was great.
And they're great.
And we enjoyed eating those, and we also managed to save some seed out of there. So we'll definitely be growing those again. The greenhouse yard up...
Half of it was a success, half of it was a just plain fail.
Right, and that was a combination of factors. We didn't think about... Well, the wind was higher than usual this spring to go with the heat and the dry, because that's always a good combination. And our drying winds here can be brutal. Brutal. So it was hard to keep those straw bales watered enough. And then we had squirrel troubles. I mean, we would come in there, the plant would be great, it would be ready to go, and you come back and half the plant's missing. And
well, in one case, the entire
plant, was gone. And that was squirrel problems early in the year. We took care of that, but the damage had been done by that time. But the success there was the fact that I put, as the greenhouse got too hot during the middle of the summer, I put the brassicas, which I knew could only take so much heat, in the shade of the greenhouse. So they got sun until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then the entire rest of the day they were in the shade from the greenhouse. That worked like a charm. We had lettuce, we had kohlrabi, cabbage, Swiss chard, and tons of it. I mean, I planted tons and tons there, and we got tons and tons.
So our two big successes for crops from my perspective was, number one, the kohlrabi, because we were able to grow it in the middle of summer when it was 105 degrees outside. Nobody had expected us to be able to do that, but it worked. I was really happy. I found a bunch of new ways to cook it and new dishes to make with it, but the second one was really
cherries.
Spectacular.
Husk cherries. That was
also called ground cherries.
Yeah, they're in the nightshade family. They look like a little baby tomatillo, and they are
delicious. That's what
delicious.
They are.
They're a little bit smaller than your average gooseberry, and they have a similar flavor to a gooseberry. We will definitely grow them again. They were awesome. They produced loads and loads, and it was just such a delight to be able to go out and harvest several handfuls of them in the morning, and we would just sit there and eat them. We ate them for several weeks before we did anything other than eat them. One of our goals this year, which we actually did a pretty good job on, was not to preserve as much and to eat fresh more, and only to preserve things that made sense to preserve.
Really what we wanted to do is only preserve the things that we like the taste of the preserved food for. So, for example, I like certain kinds of pickles. I don't like other kinds of pickles. So Irene focused on making the kind of pickles I like and only doing enough that I might be able to eat them over the next 2 years.
Right. But see, that makes sense. I was actually listening to a homesteading family up in Idaho, and they were saying the same thing, that their goal was to actually save more food but preserve less. So what we did was we ate more fresh. In previous years, sometimes Henry wasn't here because he was working out of state or something like that, but I could not keep up with the amount of asparagus we were getting.
So we ate asparagus for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
This year, yes, we did. And, you know, he would do something like make eggs Benedict, and then we'd have some leftover sauce to go with our cold asparagus. We'd eat them hot, we'd eat them cold, we'd eat them in soups. And we really, really enjoyed our asparagus this year.
Stick around and see what happens then. Thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And
hit the notification bell.
Why?
Well, because that way you'll know when we're doing something else crazy. Otherwise you might miss it.
We're always doing something crazy. Thanks for watching. We'll talk with you later.
Bye.
Bye.